What if I told you that a man who built $1 billion empire thought he would never have a family? He had power, wealth, and respect, but no children, no love, no legacy. He believed his life was complete until 4 orphans called him Dad. This is not just a story of business success. It's a story of how one moment can turn a powerful CEO into a father of 4. Stay with me until the end, because you'll discover the hidden truth, the shocking decision he made, and the lesson that could change the way you see success forever. Before we talk about the moment that changed his life, we need to understand the man he was before it all happened. To the world was a CEO, a visionary, and a leader who built his empire from the ground up. But behind the closed doors of boardrooms and beyond the headlines in business magazines, he was something else entirely. He was a man who had given every ounce of his energy to his work and left little room for anything else. His days started before the sun rose. While most people were still asleep, he was already on his phone, scanning through reports, replying to emails, and preparing himself for another long day. Coffee wasn't just a morning ritual, it was fuel, as necessary to him as oxygen. From there, he would step into meetings that seemed never. Strategy calls with investors, negotiations with partners, presentations to clients. Each hour was accounted for, each moment carefully dedicated to the business that had become his life. He worked through breakfast, through lunch, and often through dinner. To him, meals were not a time for connection or conversation. They were quick, refueling stops, squeezed in between back-to-back responsibilities, while others sat at the dinner table with their families. He sat at his desk with spreadsheets and contracts. The glow of his computer screen became the closest thing to a companion. Years passed in this cycle. His company grew. His bank account grew. His influence in the business world grew. He was celebrated as an example of what hard work and determination could achieve. Young entrepreneurs admired him. Journalists wrote about him. Investors trusted him. On the surface, it looked like the perfect life, but if you looked closer, you would see the emptiness behind the success. Friends moved on. They got married, had children, and posted pictures of family vacations on social media. He clicked like on their updates, sometimes even left a comment. But deep down, he felt like an outsider looking in on a world he would never be part of. Invitations to weddings and family gatherings stopped coming. Not because people disliked him, but because they knew he would be too busy to attend. After a while, they simply stopped asking. Nights were the hardest. After 12, sometimes 14 hours at the office, he would return to his luxurious but silent home. Expensive furniture filled the rooms. Art lined the walls. But there was no laughter, no voices, no warmth. He would often pour himself a drink, sink into the leather chair by the window, and stare at the city lights. To the outside world, he looked like a man who had everything. But in that silence, he felt the weight of what he didn't have. Some said he chose this life, that he loved his work so much, he never needed anything else. Others whispered that maybe he was too afraid. Afraid of loud children, afraid of the vulnerability that comes with a family. He never confirmed either side. Instead, he hid behind the same answer whenever the topic came up. I'm married to my business. It was partly true. His business was his world. Every milestone the company achieved was a personal victory. Every new contract was like a small celebration. But when the lights in the office went off, when the applause faded, he couldn't escape the quiet question echoing inside him. What is all this for? There had been relationships in his past, of course. Women who admired his drive and ambition. Women who were drawn to his success. But one by one, they faded away. They realized that they would always come second to his work. At first, he tried to convince them and himself that it wasn't true. But soon, he stopped fighting it. He accepted the fact that love required time and effort he wasn't willing to give. Children required patience, energy, and sacrifice. He didn't believe he had, so he locked those doors in his mind and threw away the keys. In public, he wore the mask of confidence. In interviews, he joked about being too busy for family life. At networking events, he played the role of the untouchable CEO whose only true love was his company. People laughed. They admired him. but none of them saw what lay beneath the mask. Because deep down, he had convinced himself of one thing. He was not meant for children. It wasn't just about being busy. It wasn't just about choosing work. It was about the belief that he wasn't cut out for it at all. The idea of being a father terrified him. What if he failed? What if he couldn't give them the love and care they deserved? What if he repeated mistakes from his own childhood that he had tried so hard to bury? These thoughts haunted him in ways he never admitted to anyone. Instead, he drowned them in work. Whenever the silence grew too loud, he answered another email, started another project, or set another goal. Success became his shield, protecting him from facing the life he avoided. But life has a way of testing the walls we build, and his walls, Togstrong, were not unbreakable. Before he could realize it, the very thing he had convinced himself. He would never have the role of a father was waiting, just around the corner. Not through careful planning, not through marriage or preparation, but through the most unexpected, unbelievable twist life could throw his way. Before we talk about the shocking moment itself, we need to step into the day that seemed ordinary at first. To him, it was just another entry in his calendar, squeezed between investor calls and strategy sessions. A charity visit. Nothing more, nothing less. He had attended dozens before cutting ribbons, smiling for photographs, shaking hands, handing out donations. It was part of the public image, part of the duty of being a CEO who wanted to show the world that he cared. That morning, he woke up the same way he always did before dawn, checking his emails while sipping coffee so strong it could wake the dead. His assistant reminded him of the schedule. "You have that charity event at noon, Children's Center, downtown. It won't take long." He nodded, barely paying attention, already thinking about the afternoon meeting with foreign investors. In his mind, the charity visit was a box to tick, a polite gesture before returning to what he considered real business. He arrived in style. As always, a black car, tinted windows, security detail. Cameras flashed as he stepped out in his tailored suit, polished shoes, and the confidence of a man who had conquered boardrooms and stock markets. He shook hands with organizers, exchanged a few words with reporters, and wore the practiced smile of a leader who knew how to perform in public. To the outside world, he looked in control, unshakable. Inside, however, he was simply waiting for it to be over. The event was held at a community hall, modest but warm, filled with balloons, posters, and the laughter of children. The CEO had attended similar gatherings before. Usually, there were speeches, polite, applause, maybe a photo opportunity with a large check being handed over. He expected nothing different this time. What he didn't know was that this day would carve itself into his memory forever. As he walked inside, the atmosphere shifted. He noticed the children right away. They weren't dressed in polished uniforms like the kids at private schools he sometimes sponsored. Their clothes were simple, worn, but their faces were alive with energy. Some were playing with toys in the corner. Others were coloring pictures at small wooden tables. But 4 of them stood apart. For children with eyes that seemed to search for something or someone. At first, he didn't think much of it. He moved through the routine. Greet the staff. Hear about the programs, not politely at the statistics. But every few minutes, his gaze was pulled back to those 4 children. Their eyes followed him everywhere, not with fear or shyness, but with a kind of silent recognition. As if they knew him already. The ceremony continued. There were short speeches, thank yous, and applause. Then came the part where the CEO was supposed to hand out small gifts. He moved toward the children, smiling stiffly, bending down just enough to look approachable in the photographs. But before he could even say a word, it happened. The 4 children rushed forward, not cautiously, not timidly, but with the kind of reckless excitement only children possess. Their footsteps echoed in the hall. Their faces lit up. And then, in perfect unison, they shouted a word that cut through the air and froze him in place. Dad. For a split second, he thought he misheard. Maybe te Sightman, or Sir, or Uncle. But no, their voices were clear. Their eyes were locked on him with absolute certainty. They had called him Dad. Time seemed to slow down. The room, once filled with chatter and laughter, fell into stunned silence. The staff exchanged awkward glances. Reporters lowered their cameras, unsure whether to capture the moment or give it privacy. And the CEO of this man who had built skyscrapers with his ambition stood completely still, stripped of words, stripped of composure. The children didn't hesitate. They clung to his suit jacket, tugged at his hands, and repeated it again and again, louder this time, as if to erase any doubt. "Dad." Their voices carried both joy and desperation, an innocent certainty that shook him in ways no business crises ever had. He looked down at them, his mind racing. What were they? Why were they calling him this? Was it some mistake? Some cruel misunderstanding? He wanted to step back, to regain control of the moment. But something in their eyes pinned him to the ground. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't confusion. To them, he was exactly who they believed he was. His bodyguards moved closer, unsure whether to intervene. The event organizers whispered nervously, trying to explain, but their voices blurred into the background. The only sound he could truly hear was the word "Dad," echoing again and again from those four small voices. In that instant, his carefully constructed identity CEO, businessmen, strategist meant nothing. He wasn't standing in a boardroom. He wasn't negotiating a deal. He was a man being called Dad by children who seemed to believe it with every fiber of their being. The weight of the word pressed down on him. His heart raced. His palms grew damp. And for the first time in years, he felt truly vulnerable. It wasn't the vulnerability of losing money or missing a business opportunity. It was deeper. It was raw. It was the terrifying possibility of being needed in a way he had never prepared for. Before we talk about the silence that followed, let's step into that exact second. The kind of second that stretches into eternity, where every breath feels louder than thunder and every glance carries the weight of a lifetime. The word "Dad" had already left the children's lips, and now it floated in the air, hanging heavy over everyone present. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of respect at a ceremony, not the brief pause between speeches. This was the kind of silence that unsettles the air, a silence where people forget to breathe, waiting to see what happens next. He froze, his body locked in place, his polished shoes glued to the floor, as though invisible roots had shot through the tiles to hold him there. For a man who had spoken in front of investors worth billions, who had stared down crises that could collapse companies, who had answered tough questions from the media without flinching, this moment unraveled him completely. His heart pounded, fast and furious, like a drummer who had lost control of rhythm. It wasn't the steady confidence of a man in charge, it was chaos in his chest, his body betraying the calm exterior he was desperately trying to maintain. He tried to laugh it off. A quick smile tugged at the corner of his lips, awkward and uncertain. He even forced a small chuckle, hoping the children would giggle too, and that the staff would understand it as a harmless mix. Children say funny things sometimes, he told himself. Maybe they were just playing. Maybe they called every man Dad. Maybe this was nothing. But the children weren't laughing. Their faces were pure, earnest, and unwavering. To them, it wasn't a joke. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. Their eyes carried no hint of mischief, only sincerity. And sincerity, he realized, was far more terrifying than mockery. The children clung tighter. One held his sleeve, as though it were the only rope keeping him from falling. Another wrapped tiny arms around his leg, grounding him to the moment in a way that contracts and bank accounts never could. A third looked straight into his eyes, unblinking, with a gaze so steady it pierced straight through his defenses. And the smallest one, barely tall enough to reach his waist, kept repeating the word softly, as if testing it, as if savoring the possibility. Dad, Dad, Dad. The CEO's mind raced. Who told them to say this? Was it the staff trying to create a heartwarming scene for the cameras? Was it staged for publicity? But no, he quickly dismissed that thought. The staff looked just as shocked as he felt. Some covered their mouths, others whispered frantically, and a few stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene. This was no orchestrated stunt. This was raw, unexpected, real. Before we talk about what he felt next, you must understand what control meant to this man. All his life, he thrived on controlling outcomes, forecasting markets, predicting competitors, planning every move. 3 steps ahead. Control was his armor. Control was his comfort. And now, standing in that silent room with 4 children calling him Dad, he had none. Confusion wrapped around him like a storm. Why him? Out of all the people who visited that center, why did these children choose him? He wasn't gentle. He wasn't warm. He had no practice in fatherhood. No soft edges, no stories of bedtime or scraped knees. He was a man of numbers, contracts, schedules. Yet, in the innocent eyes of those children, he was something more. He wanted to speak, to say anything that could restore order, but the words jammed in his throat. Should he correct them? Should he pull away gently and tell them they were mistaken? Or should he simply stand still and let it pass? Every option felt dangerous. If he corrected them, he risked breaking something fragile in their hearts. If he accepted it, even as a pretense, he risked breaking something in himself. The silence deepened. His laugh had failed. His attempts to remain calm had cracked. And all that was left was the pounding of his heart and the grip of 4 small hands pulling him into a reality he wasn't prepared for. Before we talk about the reactions around him, imagine the scene through the eyes of the people present. The reporters, cameras still dangling in their hands, didn't know whether to capture the moment or respect it. His security team hovered nervously, unsure if they should pull the children away or wait for his signal. The staff of the center stood helpless, whispering explanations that never reached his ears. And the children. The children looked at him as though the universe had finally answered a prayer they had whispered countless nights into the dark. It wasn't admiration for his wealth. It wasn't awe for his power. To them, he wasn't a CEO in a fine suit. He was a man who, in their innocent eyes, looked like a father. Maybe it was his presence. Maybe it was his expression, softened by a rare moment of vulnerability. Or maybe it was something no one could explain, not even him. But in that instant, they believed. He felt the weight of that belief crashing onto him like a tidal wave. His confusion wasn't just about why they chose him. It was about what the word dad really meant. For him, it had always been an abstract concept, something that belonged to other men. Men who balanced office life with birthday parties. Men who carried photos of their children in their wallets. It was never a word that touched his life, until now. Before we talk about the next heartbeat, let's pause on his silence. It was not the silence of ignorance. It was the silence of a man standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down at a future he never imagined for himself. It was the silence of realizing that sometimes life does not wait for your permission to change. It simply changes, and you must either fall with it or learn to fly. The children didn't notice his hesitation. Children rarely do it. They weren't analyzing his body language, calculating his response, or worrying about consequences. They only felt what they felt, and what they felt was simple. This man is Dad. Their truth was pure, unshakable, and entirely their own. He, however, was trapped between 2 worlds. The world he had built structured, predictable, profitable, and the world these children were offering him messy, unpredictable, emotional. For the first time, he couldn't merge them into a neat balance sheet. There was no formula for this. No quarterly report could explain why his chest tightened every time the smallest child whispered Dad again. Softa, almost pleading, as if begging him not to let go of the word. Confusion bled into fear. Not fear of the children, fear of himself. Fear of what this moment might awaken. Fear of the possibility that beneath the armor of CEO, beneath the layers of discipline and detachment, there lived a man who had always wanted to be needed, to be called Dad, even if he never admitted it. The silence stretched on, but within him, noise roared 1,000 thoughts, 1,000 possibilities, crashing together in chaos. And still, the children held on. And still, the children smiled up at him, eyes filled with hope, waiting for him to respond. Before we talk about the answers he uncovered, let's return to the questions that haunted him. Why him? Why Dad? Why did 4 children, who had never seen him before, look at him with the certainty of family? These weren't questions he could brush aside with a casual smile. They clung to his thoughts, echoing louder with every heartbeat. The next day he asked. He needed clarity. He approached the staff of the charity center, his voice calm but his mind restless. Why did those children call me that? His tone carried the weight of both authority and vulnerability. For the first time in years, his questions weren't about business projections, profits, or strategies. They were about something much more fragile. Belonging? At first, the staff hesitated. They exchanged glances, whispered quietly, and avoided his eyes. Perhaps they feared he would be offended. Perhaps they worried he would leave, never to return. But his persistence broke through their hesitation. He leaned in, firm but gentle. I need to know the truth. Please. And then he learned it. The children were orphans, 4 small lives bound together by loss, clinging to one another because they had no one else to cling to. Their stories were different, yet the pain was the same. One had been abandoned as a baby. Another had lost both parents in an accident. A third had been left behind when relatives could not care for him. And the youngest, barely old enough to understand, only knew that she had no one waiting for her at night. They had no father to guide them. No mother to comfort them, no family to whisper, "You belong to us." Before we talk about his reaction, picture how he listened. This was a man who sat through countless board meetings, nodding at presentations, flipping through reports, calculating risks. Yet, never had he listened the way he listened now. Every word from the staff cut deeper than numbers on a balance sheet ever could. He discovered something even more powerful. The children had written letters. Simple letters, crumpled sheets of paper, filled with uneven handwriting and misspelled words, tucked away in drawers as if saving dreams for later. In those letters, they wrote about the families they wished for. A father who would teach them to ride a bike. A dad who would show up at school events. A protector who would tuck them in at night and promise them the monsters were only pretend. And among those letters, one detail stood out. They had described him, not by name, of course, but their words painted the image of a man in a suit, tall and strong, someone who looked like he could fight the world for them. It was as though fate had drawn him into their imagination long before they ever saw him. When he saw their story, when he touched those letters, something inside him cracked. It wasn't the clean break of anger, or the sharp snap of frustration. It was the slow, aching fracture of a wall he had spent decades building around his heart. A wall built of excuses. I don't have time. I'm not meant for children. My life is already full. That wall now showed its first cracks. Before we talk about the tears he refused to shed, let's pause at his silence once again. He didn't argue. He didn't lecture. He simply held the papers, his fingers tracing the crooked handwriting, his eyes lingering on the words Dad scribbled over and over. His chest tightened, not with the stress of work, but with the unfamiliar weight of empathy. These children weren't after his money. They didn't care about his cars, his mansion, or his titles. They weren't impressed by power. They weren't impressed by luxury. To them, he wasn't a CEO. He was just a man, someone who could be theirs. And that truth disarmed him more than any hostile takeover, more than any financial crisis he had ever faced. For the first time, he was being asked for something he couldn't measure, trade, or negotiate. He was being asked for love. Before we talk about what he did next, you must understand how foreign this was to him. His whole life had been about transactions. High-B take profit and loss, investments and returns. Even his personal relationships were neat, structured, scheduled between flights and meetings. But this was not a transaction. This was a plea. For voices calling for something priceless, something that could not be bought or bargained. The presence of a father. The staff showed him moorings the children had made, crayon sketches of stick figures holding hands, a tall figure in the middle, always labeled Dad, with 4 smaller figures beside him. Sometimes the father wore a suit. Other times he had a briefcase. The resemblance was undeniable. The children had already cast him in a role he never auditioned for. Yet somehow, He fit the part. As he studied the drawings, memories flickered through his mind. He remembered his own childhood. His father had been distant, always working, always absent. Perhaps that's why he buried himself in ambition, trying to prove something, trying to become the man his father never was. But here, standing before 4 children who had no father at all, he saw the cruel symmetry of fate. They needed what he had been denied, and suddenly, the pain of his own past merged with theirs. Before we talk about how he carried this realization, picture the room around him. The children weren't there this time. It was just him, the staff, the letters, and the drawings. Yet their presence filled the space. He could almost hear their voices, calling again, soft but insistent. Dad. The word no longer felt like a mistake. It felt like an invitation to step out of the role he had mastered: the CEO, the strategist, the empire builder, and step into a role he had never dared to imagine: the father. Still, questions swirled in his mind. Could he do it? Was he capable of love, of care, of patience? Did he have space in his life for anyone other than himself and his company? Fear whispered that he would fail them, that he would disappoint them, that he was unworthy of the word they had chosen for him. But another voice, quieter, gentler, asked, "What if you were meant for this all along?" The discovery was not just about the children. It was about himself. For the first time, he saw that success without love was emptiness. That empire without family was silence. That wealth without someone to share it with was nothing more than numbers in a bank. And as he sat there, the letters trembling in his hands, the truth settled over him like a weight and a gift all at once. These children weren't searching for a provider. They weren't searching for a businessman. They were searching for a father. And maybe, just maybe, they had found him. Before we talk about the decision he faced, let's step into that long, restless night. The kind of night where sleep feels like a stranger and silence grows heavier with every passing hour. The city outside his window glowed with lights. Cars moved like streams of fire, and skyscrapers stood proud against the dark. It was the world he had built, the empire he had conquered, but none of it could silence the echo of 4 small voices whispering the same word over and over. Dad. He tossed and turned, the sheets tangled around him like chains. For years, his bed had been a place of rest after battles fought in boardrooms. He would close his eyes and drift quickly into the comfort of knowing tomorrow would be planned, predictable, within his control. But tonight, his control was gone. His mind replayed their faces endlessly, their wide eyes, their fragile hope, their tiny arms that clung to him without fear. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them again. Every time he tried to breathe deeply, he heard the word Dad echoing like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Before we talk about the questions he asked himself, remember that this was a man who had always believed he had the answers. In business, problems were challenges. Challenges were puzzles. And puzzles could always be solved with logic, numbers, or strategy. But this wasn't a puzzle. This was a call to his soul. And souls don't respond to spreadsheets. He asked himself again and again. Could I really do this? Could I be the father they needed? And then a darker question crept in. Or would I fail them, the way life already had? Failure was not a word he liked. In business, he avoided it at all costs. He prepared for it, outsmarted it, built walls against it. But failure in fatherhood, that was a different battlefield. There were no forecasts for love, no guarantees for connection, no insurance against heartbreak. The night deepened, the city grew quieter, yet his thoughts grew louder. He stood up, walked across his penthouse, and stared out the glass wall that overlooked the skyline. Down below, families slept in small apartments, children dreaming with the comfort of knowing their parents were near. He realized then that the children he had met had no such comfort. Their nights were filled with uncertainty, their dreams shaped not by safety, but by longing. Before we talk about the crossroad he stood at, let's remember what choices really mean. Some choices are simple. What to eat, what to wear, which meeting to attend. Others are life-altering, the kind that split your timeline into a before and an after. That night, his life balanced on the edge of such a choice. He could walk away. It would be easy. All he had to do was stay silent, never return to the center, and let the moment fade into memory. The world wouldn't question him. No one would accuse him. He would still be respected, admired, successful. His empire would keep running. His name would remain powerful. His days would remain predictable. But he knew what that choice would cost him, not in money, not in reputation, but in something far greater. It would cost him the chance to answer the voices that had called him dad. It would cost him the chance to turn loneliness into belonging, for both them and himself. The other path was harder. He could open his heart. He could step into a role he had never trained for, never studied, never prepared to master. He could become what they saw in him. Not a CEO, not a tycoon, but a father. Before we talk about how he weighed these paths, picture the war inside him. On one side stood fear. Fear of change, inadequacy. Fear that he was too late in life to learn the language of fatherhood. On the other side stood hope, the hope in their eyes, the hope in their letters, the hope that perhaps destiny had chosen him for a reason. He remembered moments from his own past that he had buried under work. The day his father missed his graduation, choosing business over family. The nights he sat alone as a boy, waiting for someone to ask about his day. The silent car rides where love was absent, replaced with the weight of expectations. And as those memories surfaced, he realized he had become his father's successful but distant, present in the world but absent in the heart. The thought terrified him. He didn't want to repeat that cycle. Before we talk about the dawn that crept through his window, let's pause at the hours. Just before it, the darkest hours, the hours when he sat at his desk, letters from the children spread out before him. A wreath. Each one, again, slowly this time, as though their words carried the answers he couldn't find inside himself. One child had written, "I just want someone to hold my hand when I'm scared." Another, "I want a dad who will clap for me when I do something good." The third, "I don't need toys. I just want someone to tell me they love me." And the youngest had drawn a picture of a stick figure holding 4 little figures with hearts all around them. He pressed his hand over the drawing, his fingers trembling. For the first time in decades, tears blurred his vision. Not tears of defeat, but tears of recognition. Recognition of the emptiness in his life. Recognition of the truth he had avoided. Recognition that he had spent years building everything except the one thing that mattered most. Before we talk about the choice he leaned toward, let's imagine him sitting there, whispering questions into the silence. Am I strong enough? Am I patient enough? Can I learn to love them the way they deserve? What if I fail them? What if primera caene? Give them what they need. But another whisper rose inside him, quieter but steadier. What if you can? What if this is why you've been given everything else to finally give something that can't be measured in wealth? The night stretched long, but his answer grew closer. It wasn't clear. It wasn't simple, but it was coming, step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat. And as the first light of morning painted the sky, he knew he could not remain unchanged. Before we talk about the man who became a father of 4, let's go back to the moment he made his choice. For years, his life had been carefully designed around discipline, order, and control. Every meeting was planned, every decision calculated, every risk weighed against reward. He was a man who never allowed emotions to interfere with business. Love, family, relationships, he had filed them away as distractions. But when those 4 children called him dad, something cracked. At first, he resisted it. He told himself he was too busy, too inexperienced, too old to start a family. Yet, when he closed his eyes at night, their faces appeared, their eyes wide with hope, their smiles fragile yet determined, their voices echoing that one word he thought he'd never hear. Dad. Step by step, he found himself drawn into their world. It began small, a phone call to check in on them, a visit after work, sitting quietly, just listening as they spoke about their fears of being abandoned, fears of not being loved, fears of waking up one morning and finding themselves alone again. For a man who once thrived on numbers, charts, and contracts, These conversations felt heavier than any boardroom decision he had ever made. He realized that being a father wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being present. So he started showing up. At first, awkwardly, like a guest in a world he didn't fully understand. He boofed toys thinking they would impress the children. But what truly mattered was when he sat on the floor and played with them. Treat. To motivate them with expensive gifts. But what made them happiest was when he simply listened to their stories before bed. The transformation wasn't instant. It wasn't a single moment of change, but a series of small choices. Choosing to tuck them in instead of finishing one more late-night email. Choosing to cook with them on weekends instead of dining alone at five-star restaurants. Choosing to help with homework instead of reviewing quarterly reports. Slowly, his priorities shifted. The empire he had built was no longer the center of his life. 4 little lives had taken that place. He became their protector. When one of them woke up crying from a nightmare, he was there to comfort them. When another felt insecure at school, he showed up at the parent-teacher meeting, making sure they knew they had someone to stand up for them. The man who once walked into rooms demanding respect now walked into rooms offering reassurance. He became their teacher, not just in academics, but in life. He taught them discipline, the kind that made them fear mistakes, but the kind that helped them grow. He shared lessons about honesty, responsibility, and perseverance. When they failed, he didn't scold them. He reminded them that failure was just another step toward success. He became their family. Slowly, the children stopped seeing him as the CEO in the suit. They started seeing him as home. They rushed to greet him when he came back from work, their laughter filling the halls of his once silent mansion. Their drawings began covering his office walls. Their little shoes, once absent, now lined up messily by the door. The transformation didn't just change his daily life, it changed his heart. He had spent decades believing that love was a weakness, that emotions slowed a man down. But now, he understood the truth. Love was empty, a weakness. Love was strength. Love gave meaning to every achievement, to every sacrifice, to every late night and early morning. His days, once filled with board meetings and profit margins, were now filled with bedtime stories and tiny footsteps running across marble floors. He no longer measured success in dollars or market shares, but in the smiles of 4 children who finally felt safe. Before, he had built an empire with his mind, an empire admired by colleagues, envied by rivals, and feared by competitors. But in the quiet moments, he realized that empire was empty without someone to share it with. Now, he was building something different, not with balance sheets or contracts, but with love, patience, and laughter. And those 4 children, they weren't just filling a gap in his life. They were teaching him things he had never known. They showed him the power of forgiveness when they trusted him despite the world having failed them before. They showed him the value of time, reminding him that every moment mattered more than any meeting. They showed him joy, the kind of pure, unfiltered happiness that no amount of wealth could buy. This transformation was not about him becoming their savior. It was about them saving him. For years, he believed he didn't need a family. But the truth was, his heart had been waiting all along. Waiting for the laughter. Waiting for the chaos. Waiting for the unshakable bond that only children could bring. And so, the man who once thought he had no space for children now couldn't imagine life without them. His mornings began with breakfast chatter instead of silent coffee. His nights ended with "Good night, Dad," instead of emails that stretched past midnight. His house was no longer a fortress of solitude, but a living, breathing home. He had spent his entire life mastering the art of building an empire. But these 4 children, these 4 voices who once called him Dad in a room full of strangers, the ones who built his Before we talk about the lesson hidden in this story, we must understand something about life itself. Life rarely follows the plans we set for it. We spend years imagining the future, making schedules, drawing roadmaps, setting goals, and yet, in the blink of an eye, everything can change. Sometimes, it changes through loss. Sometimes, through opportunity. And sometimes, through people we never expected to meet. This man was the perfect example of that truth. For decades, he believed he knew exactly what his life was about. Success, growth, power. He planned every detail, from his morning routine to his 5-year financial projections. He thought he was in control, but control is an illusion. Life is not a machine you program. It is a river that flows with its own current. And one day, that current brought 4 children into his world. Children he'd never planned for. Children he never expected. And yet, they became the very center of his existence. The lesson here is simple, but powerful. Life is not always about what we plan. Sometimes, the family we never imagined is the family that saves us. This man had no intention of becoming a father. In fact, he had convinced himself he wasn't meant for it. But love doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait until you're ready. It arrives unannounced. It shatters your walls, and it reshapes your life in ways you could never have designed. Money, status, and achievements are often treated as the ultimate goals. People chase them endlessly, thinking they will provide happiness. And yes, money can buy comfort. It can buy houses, cars, and vacations. But comfort is not the same as fulfillment. A man can sit in a mansion and still feel lonely. A woman can hold a diamond and still feel empty. What gives life its true meaning is love, the bonds we form, the connections we nurture, the lives we touch and allow to touch us in return. Before we talk about love as an abstract idea, let's look at it through this man's experience. He had once believed love was unnecessary. He thought it was a distraction, something that belonged to other people's lives. But when 4 children looked at him with hope, when they called him Dad, he realized love was not a weakness. Love was the strongest force he had ever encountered. Stronger than ambition, stronger than wealth, stronger than fear. He discovered that success without someone to share it with was hollow. What use is an empire if no one is there to laugh with you at dinner? What use is wealth if no one runs into your arms when you come home? What use is power if your heart feels powerless? The children taught him that love was not about what he could buy for them, it was about the moments he gave them. Reading a story before bed, listening when they were scared, celebrating small victories, being present. And isn't that the deeper lesson for all of us? That no matter how much we plan, no matter how far we chase after success, life is measured not by what we accumulate, but by what we give. Not by the size of our bank account, but by the size of our heart. Not by the empire we build with our minds, but by the love we allow into our souls. Before we talk about the moral as a general truth, think about how often people shut themselves off from possibilities. They say, I don't want kids, or I'm not ready for love, or family isn't for me. They build walls around themselves, just like this CEO did. But sometimes, the very thing we are running from is the thing that completes us. Sometimes, the love we are afraid to accept is the love that heals us. Sometimes, the family we never thought we wanted is the family we cannot imagine living without. And there's another side to this lesson. It isn't just about receiving love, it's about giving it. These children weren't looking for money or comfort. They were looking for belonging. They were looking for a hand to hold. They were looking for someone to stand in their corner when life felt unfair. And when he gave them that, something magical happened. Behebing Lao, he found Lao. By protecting them, he healed himself. By opening his heart, he discovered that the heart grows bigger when it is shared. Money, in comparison, has limits. It can build walls, but it cannot build trust. It can buy gifts, but it cannot buy laughter that comes from the heart. It can fund education, but it cannot replace the pride in a parent's eyes when a child succeeds. It can provide shelter, but it cannot provide warmth. Comfort is external. Love is internal. And only love can make comfort truly worth having. Before we talk about this story as his transformation, let's also see it as a mirror for our own lives. How many of us are chasing something that may not actually fill us? How many of us think happiness will arrive once we achieve one more milestone? How many of us ignore the people around us, the opportunities for connection, the chance to give and receive love, because we're too focused on the plan? This story reminds us that the best moments of life are rarely planned. They are surprises. A stranger who becomes family, a friendship that turns into love, a child's smile that changes the course of an adult's life. These are not things we can schedule into a calendar. They arrive unexpectedly, and when they do, they demand that we pause, that we reconsider what really matters. The CEO's life was a straight line of progress upward. Forward, always more. But life gave him a curve, a detour, a surprise, and in that detour, he found meaning. The children showed him that love doesn't always come in the package we expect. Sometimes, it comes in 4 pairs of little shoes lined up by the door. Sometimes, it comes in voices calling you Dad when you least expect it. Sometimes, it comes not because you planned for it, but because you were open enough to receive it. And perhaps that is the greatest moral here. Love transforms not only those who receive it, but also those who give it. In giving, we are changed. In caring for others, we discover who we truly are. In being called Dad, he finally understood what it meant to live, not just exist. Not just achieve, but truly live with purpose. EART. This is the story of a man who had everything: wealth, power, respect, but believed he would never be a father. Then one day, 4 children changed his world with a single word: Dad. In that moment, he found something greater than success. He found his purpose. What about you? What would you do if life placed such a surprise in your path? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories.